Things are looking pretty bleak for theater owners around the country because usually in the months of November and December, there's a slate of movies set to be released that will kind of help propel them to the end of the year and finish strongly. But this year, the pickings are kind of few and far between. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for why that is. I mean, the strikes going on are kind of a big factor of why movies just didn't get released and got delayed, sort of thing. But the movies that are set to be released aren't really that anticipated, and they're expecting this to kind of be a flop of a winter season. For the first time in more than a decade, excluding the pandemic-stricken 2020, there's no surefire blockbuster with the potential to gross $1 billion globally to cap off the year. This article goes on to mention Aquaman 2 as kind of being the big movie coming out in December that theater owners can maybe expect the most out of, but a lot of people aren't anticipating as much. I mean, the projections suggest that it's going to be a flop for DC, and that's kind of in line with what we've been seeing coming out of their movies this last year. I mean, like look at The Flash, Blue Beetle, Shazam 2. I mean, they've just been producing nothing but flops now. Unlike those other movies, though, I mean, this one is following the first Aquaman movie, which did gross over $1 billion globally. So there is the potential for this one to succeed, but most people aren't expecting that much. With one big film, you must stock a lot of showtimes to meet demands. If it doesn't work out, you end up with a lot of empty showtimes, Phoenix Theater VP Jordan Hallman says. With a more diverse slate of films, we can spread our bets. This isn't to say that Aquaman 2 is the only thing set to come out in December, but it's definitely the one with the potential to make the most money for theaters. Because if you look at the other slate of things set to come out, I mean, you got Wonka, Illumination Studios' Migration, Iron Claw from A24, and the musical adaptation of The Color Purple. I mean, out of this list right here, the only one with the potential to make any meaningful money for the movie theaters is probably Wonka. And while early word on that suggests that the movie is probably decent, there's really no buzz any meaningful way, at least surrounding the movie. And people just don't seem to care about watching a Wonka prequel movie. And that's why Aquaman 2 is pretty much the last hope for theaters this December, which is kind of a sad state, if you ask me. And this isn't just had anything to do with superhero movies, because I know Martin Scorsese's talked about that in recent months about how superhero movies aren't real cinema. And Christopher Nolan has actually been kind of pushing back on that. And he says that these type of movies are necessary for the whole Hollywood ecosystem to kind of create a balance, because you need to have those big budget movies to help finance the smaller budget movies from the studio. And they also help drive people to theaters. And we're not really getting a ton of that. But this is more specifically what Christopher Nolan had to say about it. We all watch movies with different expectations for what kind of movie it is. We all go to the movies wanting to see something different than we saw the week before. You have horror movies and comedies and documentaries. The movie screen can be anything. And so the more variety we have, the more interesting films being made, the better it is for all of us as moviegoers and as industry professionals. And that's the big takeaway from all this, is that you just need to have variety. And I'm not necessarily even saying less superhero movies in particularly, because you can have a variety in the superhero genre. They're just not doing that these days. And that's why the biggest thing that we have coming out in December is Aquaman 2, which is basically just another superhero movie in a franchise of superhero movies that's essentially dead at this time and is getting rebooted. But this whole Christopher Nolan thing, I think he really is onto something, because last summer when he hit it big with Oppenheimer and then Barbie was successful, a lot of people were kind of examining these two movies to try to figure out what did these movies do that was so special and got people to actually go out to theaters to support them. And the fact of the matter is, it's really not that difficult. It's just the fact that they're unique movies that had interesting stories that people wanted to support. And this article from Deadline has this quote here that kind of goes into what's wrong with Hollywood these days. It's hard not to wonder how it's supposed to be inculcating the love of cinema in children. This is future moviegoers when the splashes films on offer are explicitly buckets of regurgitation. And unfortunately, these buckets of regurgitation are what we are expecting this December, with Aquaman 2 being the biggest thing set to be released. And it's just another superhero movie in a franchise of superhero movies that's basically dead at this point, because they're just rebooting it entirely. And the ones suffering from all this are the theaters themselves, and it's not even their fault. It's ultimately Hollywood's fault for basically just putting out all this crap. And in the future, we're going to see more theaters go under as a result of people just not watching stuff that's coming out nowadays. So the remaining theaters have an option. They can either continue on the path of destruction with Hollywood, or they can kind of abandon them and focus more on maybe foreign content or just other films overseas, maybe concert experiences like what we saw with Taylor Swift. So I think there is a future for theaters in the country. It just might be without Hollywood, and that's all Hollywood's fault.